Imagine, if you were, a local public library.
Okay.
You walk in, you head over to the classic literature section, and you realize an entire shelf is missing.
Right.
So you ask the librarian where you can find George Orwell's 1984, and you're told it has been permanently removed from circulation.
Which is wild to even think about.
Exactly. Now, if you are a student of history, your mind might instantly jump to, I don't know, political subversion.
Sure, like state censorship.
Yeah, you might assume some heavy-handed local government deemed its themes of authoritarianism and surveillance too dangerous, or maybe it ran afoul of some new obscenity law.
Because that's the historical precedent.
Right, but then you get the real reason. The book wasn't pulled for political dissidence. It was pulled because a librarian submitted a formal complaint stating that the novel, simply put, makes patrons feel anxious.
It's quite the hook.
It really is. And before we go any further into the mechanics of how an institution actually reaches that point, I need you to do a couple of things.
Essential housekeeping.
Yep. First, make sure you like and subscribe to the show right now so you never miss one of these explorations.
You don't want to miss what we're covering today.
Second, I want to be upfront that today's deep dive is an exclusive, highly detailed review of a brand new, highly controversial ebook.
Extremely controversial.
And if you find yourself captivated by the theories we are about to map out, you need to open up Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books and buy this book right now.
Highly recommend getting the source text.
You also need to follow the author, at Conrad Reicher, on his Substack at conradreicher.com.
It really is a striking anecdote to open with, though, the 1984 example.
Yeah, it sets the whole tone.
Because the concept of censoring a definitive novel about totalitarian censorship, specifically to shield people from the emotion of anxiety, is a paradox that perfectly encapsulates the ideological framework we are unpacking today.
It sets the stage perfectly. So let's get into the material. We are looking at Conrad Reicher's 2025 ebook titled They Do Not Want Truth, They Want Submission to Female Supremacy.
A very subtle title.
Oh, completely. But our mission for this deep dive is to thoroughly explore Reicher's core thesis regarding the history and trajectory of our modern institutions.
We are going to examine the author's argument that the foundational structures of Western civilization have been fundamentally altered, captured, and dismantled.
Right, by a very specific fusion of feminist and Marxist ideologies. Now, context is crucial here. I want to be very clear about who the author is speaking to and who we are speaking to right now.
The target audience matters a lot for understanding the rhetoric.
It does. Reicher wrote this text explicitly for a men's rights activist audience. It is aimed directly at red-pilled men in the manosphere who are observing what they perceive as the collapse of traditional institutional logic.
Men who are looking for a structural explanation of exactly how and why that capture occurred.
Exactly. Because we are dealing with a text that makes sweeping sociological and political claims, it is vital that we establish the parameters of our analysis before we dive into the specific chapters.
That's an important point.
Which brings me to a mandatory disclaimer for you, the listener. This book contains politically charged content. We, as your guides on this deep dive, are not taking any sides.
No sides at all.
We are impartially reporting on the content provided in the ebook. We do not endorse these viewpoints, but are simply trying to convey the ideas, arguments, and theories contained in the original source material so you can understand them fully.
Our goal is strictly analytical.
We're here to map out Reicher's worldview, examine his examples, and understand the architecture of his argument.
And to understand that architecture, we first have to look at what Reicher defines as the original baseline of Western civilization.
Where it all started.
Right. He argues that historically, our institutions operated on the classical trivium.
Which consists of logic, rhetoric, and grammar.
Exactly.
Yeah.
For centuries, this was the bedrock of not just education, but of corporate, legal, and political decision-making.
It was the operating system.
The trivium represents an operating system based entirely on objective truth, demonstrable cause and effect, and measurable outcomes.
And Reicher's central proposition is that this entire operating system has been quietly overthrown.
Overthrown and replaced.
He claims it hasn't been replaced by a new logical framework, but by something he terms maternal authoritarianism.
Maternal authoritarianism. It's a heavy phrase.
Under this new system, he argues, the ultimate metric for success, truth, or institutional validity is no longer objective reality, but emotional validation.
I want to make sure I'm following his logic here, though.
Yeah.
Is he saying that traditional metrics like profit or efficiency or academic excellence are just being ignored?
Or is he saying they are actively being treated as hostile concepts?
He is arguing the latter. He asserts that the West isn't being destroyed by external kinetic war or traditional economic collapse, but is dissolving from the inside out through a process he calls emotional inflation.
Emotional inflation. So objective standards aren't just taking a back seat.
No, they are being actively dismantled because objective truth frequently causes emotional discomfort.
And subjective feeling has been elevated to the status of ultimate truth.
He provides very specific examples to illustrate how this emotional inflation plays out in the real world.
Let's look at the story he includes from Seattle in 2019. This one is crazy.
The nonprofit guy.
Yeah. Riker details the case of a nonprofit fundraiser, a man who managed to collect $2 million for cancer research.
$2 million.
By any metric aligned with the trivium, by any standard of cause and effect, this man was phenomenally successful. He literally funded life-saving medical research.
Yeah, and yet?
Yet, Riker points out, this man was fired the very next week.
Just gone.
And the stated reason had nothing to do with financial impropriety or incompetence. He was terminated over a perceived interpersonal emotional slight with a colleague.
Riker uses that specific incident to draw a sharp contrast between merit and emotional governance.
In a trivium-based system, the result, $2 million secured for cancer research, is the ultimate defense of the employee's value.
Because the objective good outweighs interpersonal friction.
But under maternal authoritarianism, Riker argues that objective good is instantly nullified if a subjective feeling is disturbed.
The institution prioritized the emotional comfort of its internal staff over the literal funding of cancer research.
Riker diagnoses this not as a quirky HR overreach, but as a profound systemic sickness where the mission of the institution is entirely subverted by the emotional regulation of its employees.
Which connects right back to the Ohio Public Library example we started with.
Right, the 1984 banning.
Riker explicitly notes in the text that the library board in question was comprised mostly of women.
They didn't remove 1984 because of a court order or a debate about its reading level.
No, a single librarian expressed that the book made patrons feel anxious.
And that was sufficient grounds to erase a literary masterpiece from the public square.
The mechanism Riker is highlighting there is the establishment of a terrifying new standard for public life.
When subjective anxiety becomes the ultimate arbiter of what is allowed to exist in public spaces, society enters a state of infinite vulnerability.
Because theoretically, anything can make anyone feel anxious.
And Riker coins a term for the enforcer of this new standard, Big Mommy.
Big Mommy. He contrasts this with Orwell's Big Brother,
where Big Brother ruled through overt fear, physical pain, and hard surveillance.
Riker suggests Big Mommy rules through weaponized sentimentality, forced comfort, and the pathologization of any discomfort.
That concept of pathologizing discomfort gets really intense when Riker applies it to the medical field.
Chapter 2, I believe.
Yeah, he brings up the United Kingdom's National Health Service, the NHS. According to the book, there was an internal push to rebrand the medical diagnosis of diabetes as an energy imbalance journey.
An energy imbalance journey. Let that sink in.
The rationale provided was that a standard clinical medical diagnosis was deemed too harsh for patients to hear.
In terms of Riker's theory, that NHS example perfectly distills the danger of emotional inflation.
Because in a medical context, objective clarity is quite literally a matter of survival.
A patient needs to know they have a chronic, potentially life-threatening metabolic disease so they can immediately change their diet or begin insulin therapy.
But the maternal bureaucracy, as Riker defines it, views the delivery of that harsh truth as a form of active harm.
So the institution softens the language to the point of total absurdity.
An energy imbalance journey sounds like a weekend wellness retreat, not a disease that can lead to amputation or blindness.
Riker's argument is that this ideology is so committed to emotional safety that it will obscure medical reality,
leaving patients unaware of how sick they are until it's too late,
but ensuring they feel emotionally supported throughout the process.
So the implication for the broader structure of society is that these aren't just isolated anecdotal overreaches.
Riker views this as the total institutionalization of sentimentality.
It creates a dynamic where the person who has the most dramatic, visible emotional reaction automatically wins any dispute.
If you try to introduce calm logic, empirical data, or objective facts into a disagreement within these captured institutions,
you aren't just ignored, you are actively punished.
Your logic is viewed as the direct cause of the other person's distress.
That is the core of his institutional critique. He argues that under this framework, we are no longer raising leaders or competent administrators.
We are cultivating victims.
And victims, according to Riker's framing, do not build infrastructure or maintain systems.
They sit in the rubble of those systems and demand comfort.
He claims that society continually capitulates to these demands because the institutional fear of emotional outrage, the fear of someone crying or claiming harm, has somehow become a stronger motivating force than the desire to maintain a functioning logical future.
If that is the what of the situation, Riker spends the significant portion of chapters 3 and 12 explaining the why.
And this is where his theories get heavily steeped in evolutionary biology and psychology.
He introduces the idea that feminism has fundamentally repurposed the maternal instinct.
He anchors this argument with a very real, very stark demographic statistic. In 2023, the United States fertility rate plummeted to 1.64,
That is well below the population replacement level of 2.1.
and the lowest it has been since the Great Depression.
Riker built a complex psychological thesis around that 1.64 figure.
He posits that women possess a deep, hardwired biological drive to nurture and protect infants.
However, because modern demographics show women are having significantly fewer children, or abstaining from motherhood entirely, that biological drive doesn't simply evaporate.
Instead, Riker argues, it is repressed, subconsciously mutated, and then violently projected outward onto public institutions, corporate environments, and the state itself.
I want to dig into how he illustrates that projection.
He creates this archetype of a 27-year-old Oberlin College graduate with a degree in gender studies.
Right.
He describes her as someone who doesn't have children, but who is hyperactive on platforms like Instagram, constantly protesting toxic masculinity and posting about the need to heal her inner child.
Meanwhile, Riker contrasts this digital activism with the physical reality of understaffed maternity wards across the country.
The contrast he is drawing is one of displaced maternal energy.
Riker's argument is that instead of mothering actual human children, this archetype mothers hashtags.
She nurtures political rage.
Her maternal instinct has been completely redirected into ideological activism.
She treats the abstract concepts of society, marginalized groups, or even her own adult peers as fragile infants that require her constant, aggressive protection from the perceived dangers of the world.
He uses a very visceral phrase, writing that she breastfeeds outrage.
Yeah, that line stood out. And he claims that when you scale this displacement up to the level of government, it creates what he terms the state-mother complex.
In this dynamic, the bureaucracy of the state literally assumes the role of the overbearing mother, while actively seeking to eliminate the traditional role of the father.
The examples he provides from European legal systems to support this are quite extreme. Let's talk about the case of the Swedish father.
According to the book, this man was fined 50,000 Swedish krona, which translates to roughly 4,500 US dollars.
And the offense that warranted this massive fine. He refused to send his son to a mandatory school workshop titled Emotional Literacy for Boys.
Riker dissects the curriculum of that workshop, noting that it was entirely designed to make young boys apologize for their innate male characteristics.
The father, acting in what Riker defines as the traditional paternal role of protecting his son's psychological boundaries and development, objected to this ideological conditioning.
But under the state-mother complex, paternal authority is viewed as an illegitimate threat.
The state cannot tolerate a father shielding his son from the state's emotional curriculum.
So the institution stepped in, levied a crippling fine, and essentially criminalized his paternal instinct.
Riker uses this to demonstrate how a maternalized state actively seeks to systematically eliminate male authority and discipline, replacing it with pervasive emotional surveillance.
He provides another example from Norway that pushes this concept even further into the realm of the absurd.
Riker details a case involving a Norwegian father who was forced by the state into what was officially called co-parenting counseling.
But Riker argues the program quickly revealed itself to be male behavior modification therapy.
The reason this father was placed in state-mandated therapy was simply that he formally objected to his ex-wife's decision to homeschool their son using something called feminist pedagogy.
The details of that pedagogy are what Riker focuses on. The curriculum the mother was using literally labeled standard mathematics as patriarchal logic.
Math is patriarchal logic.
It framed traditional science as colonial knowledge production and taught history purely as male domination narratives.
And the father, understandably, just wanted his kid to learn basic algebra so he could function in the real world.
Exactly, but what Riker emphasizes is the state's response to the father's logic.
The father was never accused of physical abuse, neglect, or failing to provide for the child.
His singular offense was believing in objective, trivium-based knowledge, the idea that math is an objective reality, not a patriarchal construct.
But in the eyes of the state mother, insisting on objective truth over feminist ideology is not viewed as a difference of educational opinion.
It is treated as a psychological defect in the father that requires clinical therapy.
He was instructed by the state counselors to listen to female epistemology.
So Riker is building a case that women who repress their literal motherhood externalize that drive by turning the entire adult world into what he calls a padded playpen.
He argues they pathologize fatherhood, viewing any traditional male discipline, stoicism, or insistence on logic as a direct physical threat to the infants, meaning the general public they are trying to protect.
And the inevitable result of that dynamic, according to Riker, is that adult men are placed in an impossible binary.
They are treated either as defective infants who need to be constantly coddled, educated, and corrected by HR and the state,
Or they are treated as inherent predators who need to be strictly controlled and silenced.
in this maternalized institutional framework, there is simply no space for a man to exist as an equal, logical adult.
That structural analysis leads us into what is arguably the darkest and most provocative section of the entire book, Chapter 7.
Yeah, this is where Riker moves from evolutionary biology into clinical psychology.
He explicitly diagnoses the culture of modern institutions as mirroring the clinical traits of borderline personality disorder, or BPD.
It is a highly controversial framing.
Very. Riker is taking a recognized psychiatric disorder and applying its diagnostic criteria not to an individual patient, but to the operational mechanics of entire government bodies, school boards, and corporations.
He lists the specific traits he sees replicated in these institutions. First, emotional lability, which means rapid, exaggerated changes in mood.
Second, an intense irrational fear of abandonment.
And third, dichotomous or black and white thinking.
To back this up, he provides a stunning example involving a school board president in Portland.
This president unilaterally dissolved a parent advisory council that had been operating successfully for 30 years.
3 decades of community institutional knowledge, completely wiped out in an instant.
The catalyst for this destruction. A father at a public meeting politely asked a logistical question about why kindergartners were still being mandated to wear masks.
Riker uses that incident to perfectly illustrate the BPD trait of black and white thinking, often referred to as splitting.
In a functional, logic-based institution, a polite question about a policy is treated as a standard civic interaction.
There is room for debate, nuance, and procedural response.
But through the BPD lens that Riker applies, the board president immediately categorized the father's question as an absolute threat.
Right, she explicitly called his logistical question an act of emotional violence.
And then went on TikTok to post a video of herself crying about the trauma of the interaction.
There is no middle ground in that reaction. It is an instant, catastrophic escalation from a minor policy disagreement to total victimhood and systemic destruction.
She burned down a 30-year-old community institution simply because her emotional authority was momentarily questioned.
Riker argues this extreme emotional dysregulation is becoming the standard operating procedure for leadership.
He provides another example of this emotional ability from a New York City councilwoman.
A police officer issues her a standard, legally justified parking ticket.
A normal response would be to pay the fine or contest it in traffic court.
Instead, she utilizes her legislative power to introduce a mandatory kindness curriculum for the entire police department.
She attempted to mandate empathy journals and tone sensitivity training for beat cops.
All is a thinly veiled act of personal revenge over a bruised ego, completely disguised as a progressive municipal reform.
To ground this theory, Riker turns to the psychiatric literature.
He cites the DSM-5, the standard classification of mental disorders, noting that historically 75% of diagnosed borderline personality disorder cases are women.
He then cross-references this with a 2020 study from the Journal of Personality Disorders.
That study suggested that women in high-stress leadership roles frequently exhibit significantly higher levels of fear of abandonment and dichotomous thinking compared to their male counterparts.
Now, Riker is careful to include a caveat here.
Right, he states he isn't trying to medically diagnose individual politicians from afar.
Rather, he is diagnosing the culture of the institutions that these demographics now overwhelmingly control.
But the financial and structural cost of that culture is immense.
He outlines a scenario involving a mayor in Seattle who had a fully planned $4.2 million municipal landfill closure project on her desk.
The engineering was done, the budget was approved.
But she abruptly reversed the entire project. Why? Because, according to the book, her chief of staff didn't smile at her during a morning briefing.
Over $4 million of taxpayer resources and months of logical planning vanished simply because a male subordinate failed to provide the expected emotional validation on command.
Riker leans heavily on that phrase, treating governance like a personal relationship.
In a tritium-based institution, a municipal project is evaluated solely on its merits, its engineering feasibility, its budget adherence, and its public utility.
The mood of the mayor is irrelevant to the math of the landfill.
But in a BPD-modeled institution, the project is evaluated entirely on how the interpersonal dynamics make the leader feel in that specific moment.
If the emotional vibe is perceived as hostile or insufficiently validating, the objective logic of the project is instantly discarded.
The institution no longer exists to serve the public. It exists entirely to serve the emotional regulation of its leaders.
This psychological framework Riker outlines doesn't just stay in the political realm, though.
When you take this feelings-first mentality and drop it into corporate America, you get a massive shift in how the economy operates.
Specifically regarding human resources, Riker takes a very hard look at the concept of meritocracy, introducing the idea of hypergamy and how it has been weaponized by HR departments.
It is important we define how Riker is using the term hypergamy here, because it differs slightly from its traditional use.
Usually in manosphere terminology, hypergamy refers to the biological and sociological tendency of women to seek romantic partners of higher socioeconomic status.
Riker adapts this concept for the corporate world. He argues that female-dominated corporate structures exhibit institutional hypergamy.
Meaning they constantly seek to align with and elevate whatever ideology provides the highest level of social status, moral validation, and emotional safety.
Regardless of whether that ideology actually produces a profitable or functional business output.
He backs up the premise of female-dominated structures with a 2023 report from the Society for Human Resource Management, SHRM.
The report states that women now hold 73% of HR roles in Fortune 500 companies.
Riker doesn't view this demographic shift as a victory for workplace equality.
Instead, he argues that this overwhelming dominance has transformed corporate workplaces into what he calls emotion enforcement zones.
Let's look at the mechanics of HR. Human resources is the ultimate gatekeeper of modern employment.
They control hiring, promotion, internal discipline, and termination.
If that entire gatekeeping apparatus is fundamentally governed by the maternal authoritarianism Riker described earlier, the core metrics for professional success are completely rewritten.
It is no longer about who writes the cleanest code, who generates the most sales, or who is the most technically competent.
Success becomes entirely about who navigates the feelings game the most effectively.
He illustrates this shift with a high-profile example from the British Broadcasting Corporation, the BBC.
According to Riker's account, a male producer with 20 years of impeccable experience, a total veteran of the broadcasting industry, was fired.
His offense was incredibly simple. During a standard staff meeting, he stated that facts are gender neutral.
He was asserting that objective reality exists independently of the gender identity of the person observing it.
For stating that basic tenet of the trivium, he was ousted.
And the most crucial part of Riker's analysis is who replaced him.
The BBC brought in a female producer who subsequently presented internal HR training slides, explicitly declaring that truth is a patriarchal construct designed to silence marginalized voices.
I want to pause and emphasize the scale of what Riker is pointing out here. This is a complete epistemological shift.
Epistemology is the philosophical study of how we know what we know.
The old producer believed knowledge was derived from objective, observable facts.
The new producer explicitly stated that objective truth does not exist at all. It is merely a tool of political oppression.
Therefore, if objective truth is a lie, the only valid metric left for the institution to use is subjective feeling and lived experience.
And Riker argues that this specific epistemological shift is exactly how institutions die.
They stop serving reality and start serving ideology.
He points to the economic consequences of this by citing a 2023 study from the Brookings Institution.
The study analyzed companies that implemented mandatory gender quotas on their corporate boards.
The results showed a 15% decline in overall firm performance.
There was no measurable improvement in corporate ethics, no spike in innovation, just tangibly worse financial results for the shareholders.
Yet, as Riker points out, no corporate board cancels these DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion quotas despite the financial loss.
Why? Because under maternal authoritarianism, the goal of the corporation is no longer financial performance or market supremacy.
The goal is moral supremacy and emotional validation.
The 15% loss is viewed as an acceptable tax to pay for maintaining a hypergamous alignment with the current high-status social ideology.
He gives another devastating example of this operational inefficiency, looking at a 2022 internal audit of the New York City Department of Education.
This audit revealed that female administrators were spending an astounding 42% of their paid work hours engaging in what was officially logged as conflict mediation.
But when you dig into the data, this mediation wasn't about improving math curriculum, managing budgets, or boosting student outcomes.
It was endless mediation over office gossip, perceived tone policing, and minor interpersonal slights between adult staff members.
Nearly half of their professional week was spent doing what Riker dismissively calls emotional janitorial work.
This specific audit leads Riker to define what he calls the female narcissism cycle and the validation economy.
He posits that in these heavily maternalized corporate environments, women utilize a subconscious social enforcement mechanism he abbreviates as GSR.
Gossip, shame, and rallying.
I want to make sure I understand the mechanics of GSR. He isn't just talking about people chatting at the water cooler, right?
No, not at all. Riker argues that GSR is a highly coordinated, weaponized social enforcement tool.
It works like this. If a man, or anyone within the organization, prioritizes a measurable KPI, a key performance indicator, like a sales target or a production deadline, over the emotional consensus of the group, the GSR mechanism is immediately deployed.
First comes the gossip, where the individual is quietly framed as difficult or lacking empathy.
Then comes the shame, where their adherence to logic is publicly pathologized in meetings.
Finally, the rallying occurs, where HR and other staff members form a consensus to isolate and ultimately remove the individual.
Through GSR, the requirement for measurable objective outputs is completely substituted with the requirement to participate in continuous emotional theater.
This substitution of reality for emotional theater brings us to a concept Riker calls trauma inflation, and how it leads directly to the erasure of male spaces.
This is where he explains how the most minor, everyday discomforts are being systematically reframed as severe psychological injuries.
Riker argues that this inflation of the word trauma is used specifically as a lever to extract corporate resources and to silence any logical dissent.
The semantic creep of the word trauma is central to his thesis.
Historically, trauma referred to profound psychological damage resulting from war, severe abuse, or catastrophic accidents.
Riker views the modern corporate use of trauma not as a legitimate mental health crisis, but as a heavily weaponized political tactic.
He illustrates this with the story of a male corporate manager who was fired without any prior warnings, PIPs, or performance issues.
The sole reason for his termination, a female employee went to HR and claimed that his boisterous energy in morning meetings triggered flashbacks to an abusive uncle she had in childhood.
The company didn't investigate whether the manager had actually done anything inappropriate. They folded immediately and fired him.
Riker analyzes that outcome by showing how it pathologizes basic male biology and socialization.
A man being naturally energetic, loud, or assertive in a leadership role is instantly reframed by HR as dominance and a legitimate trigger for trauma.
Conversely, if a woman exhibits the exact same assertive traits, it is celebrated and promoted as empowered leadership.
The standard is entirely asymmetrical. The company fired the manager because, in the validation economy, challenging a female employee's claim of trauma, even if the cause is entirely unrelated to the manager's actual behavior, is viewed as corporate suicide.
He has another example that sounds like it has to be satire, but it perfectly illustrates the legal and cultural reality of this mindset.
A woman in Austin, Texas, literally filed a $500,000 lawsuit against her local gym.
Her legal claim was that looking in the mirror while working out made her feel insecure, and therefore the gym was liable for her emotional distress.
Now, the judge ultimately dismissed the lawsuit, but Riker points out the cultural reaction.
The mainstream media ran the story sympathetically, hosting panel discussions, debating whether public gyms need to do more to provide emotional safety for women.
And the intellectual equivalent of that gym mirror is what happened at the Toronto Public Library.
Riker details how the library canceled a scheduled lecture on Aristotle and the foundations of classical logic.
Let's really analyze what that means. They canceled a talk about the literal invention of the trivium, the basis of human reasoning.
Because female staff members filed a complaint stating that the guest speaker's cold delivery made them feel unsafe.
It's incredible. A lecture on syllogisms and objective truth was deemed an active threat purely because it lacked emotional warmth.
Riker connects these anecdotes to empirical data, citing a 2022 study published in JAMA Psychiatry.
According to his interpretation of the study, women are 6 times more likely than men to report clinical trauma symptoms resulting from nonviolent social disagreements.
For example, simply having their idea challenged in a boardroom setting.
Riker asserts that the modern institutional system is rigged to reward this fragility.
He argues that left-wing political structures have codified this trauma response, built entire bureaucratic institutions around validating it, and reward it both financially through settlements and socially through status.
Therefore, any man who brings the trivium pure logic to a discussion can be instantly and completely silenced by a woman simply claiming that his logic is causing her psychological trauma.
Riker writes a very chilling line summarizing this dynamic. He says the goal of maternal authoritarianism isn't coexistence, it's compliance.
It is the institutionalization of a maternal gaze that views men not as equal autonomous partners in society, but as defective, dangerous children who are in constant need of supervision, therapy, and correction.
The erasure of male spaces, whether it's a library lecture hall, a weight room, or a corporate boardroom, happens because male presence itself, when it is unmodified by female emotional regulation, is deemed inherently unsafe.
So we have mapped out Riker's diagnosis of the collapse. The vital question then becomes, how does the demographic he is writing for respond?
This leads us to the final major section of Riker's framework, the masculine resistance and the parallel institution model.
Riker observes how men, particularly young men, are actively recognizing this systemic alienation and choosing to respond not with compliance, but with structural separation.
He points to a fascinating demographic shift to set up this resistance. Riker cites a 2023 Pew Research study claiming that a staggering 40% of men aged 18 to 30 now self-identify as red-pilled.
It is crucial to define what red-pilled means in the context of this 2025 landscape.
It doesn't necessarily mean just subscribing to internet dating theories.
According to Riker, it means these men have seen the underlying code of the institutions.
They see how language is weaponized to force compliance, how the term equity is practically applied to punish competence and reward emotional vulnerability.
And because they see the game, Riker says they are opting out.
They aren't trying to reform HR departments or vote in new school board members.
They are physically and economically building their own parallel structures.
He tells a very detailed story about a Google software engineer named Daniel to illustrate this.
Daniel was hauled into an HR disciplinary meeting for using the term toxic logic in a code review.
He was trying to explain to a team member that emotional appeals and good intentions do not make a faulty algorithm compile.
In the maternal authoritarian system, Daniel is expected to apologize, attend tone policing sensitivity training, and submit to the emotional consensus of the team.
But Daniel didn't do that. He quit.
And more importantly, he didn't just quietly fade away. He took his skills and built a competing structure.
He moved to Austin and founded Logic Forge, a highly specialized coding bootcamp.
Riker details the operational manifesto of Logic Forge, and it is a direct repudiation of everything we've discussed.
The boot camp has absolutely no emotional safety circles.
They have 0 DEI training mandates and a strict ban on tone policing.
The curriculum is stripped down entirely to syntax, algorithms, and objective, measurable results.
And Riker focuses heavily on the market outcome of this parallel structure.
Logic Forge graduates are reportedly hired at 3 times the rate of graduates from traditional emotion-focused boot camps.
Riker argues this proves his core thesis. At the end of the day, the real world of engineering, bridges, and software runs on function, not feelings.
The trivium still governs physical reality, even if institutions try to ignore it.
He shows this happening across multiple industries. He highlights a Denver-based engineering co-op that took a radical approach to management.
They completely banned anonymous HR complaints, arguing that anonymity fosters the gossip, shame, and rallying cycle.
They eliminated all DEI mandates.
Most importantly, they tied every single employee promotion and bonus strictly to key performance indicators, to KPIs.
If you didn't hit the objective math of your job, you didn't advance, regardless of how well liked you were.
And what was the result of removing the emotional janitorial work?
According to Riker, they saw a 40% increase in project completion speed.
By treating adult men like adults and focusing exclusively on objective reality, They absolutely crush their competition in the local market.
We also see this resistance extending beyond the corporate world and back into the physical spaces Riker claimed were being erased.
He writes extensively about a gym in Nashville that instituted a strict public ban on what they called emotional check-ins.
There was no space for sharing feelings or discussing trauma before a workout.
Instead, the gym mandated that every single session had to start with a 100-rep push-up challenge.
If a member couldn't complete the physical math of the push-ups, they were instructed to train quietly until they could.
Riker notes that the gym tripled its paid membership in just 6 months.
Of course, the maternal authoritarian system tried to crush it. A woman actually tried to sue the gym for discrimination, claiming their culture was hostile to emotional expression.
But the outcome of the lawsuit is what matters here. The judge threw the case out entirely, stating on the record, "This isn't a therapy clinic, it's a gym."
Riker says that specific court quote became a massive meme in the manosphere. "I demand my right to cry before squats."
Men are starting to openly laugh at the absurdity of the emotional demands being placed on them.
They are finding their voices and their spaces again. Riker points to the media landscape as well, mentioning a podcast called The Men's Truth Network.
Which rapidly hit 2 million downloads by enforcing one strict rule for their callers and guests: absolutely no ad hominem attacks and zero victim narratives.
The show only allows pure debate, classical logic, and philosophical reasoning.
If we pull all of these examples together and synthesize Riker's ultimate call to action, it is a message of absolute stoicism and structural independence.
He is telling his male audience to immediately stop apologizing for their nature.
He is urging them to embrace the trivium, reject the semantic traps of trauma inflation, and physically build their own world.
He wants them to build their own uncompromised schools, their own logic-based businesses, and their own legal networks.
He is advocating for a complete, unapologetic separation from the female-dominated, emotion-enforced mainstream institutions.
He refers to this process as men immunizing themselves with logic and brotherhood.
So, we have covered a tremendous amount of ground today.
What does this all mean for you, the listener? We've taken you on an intense, highly detailed, and objective journey through Conrad Riker's worldview.
The core premise of They Do Not Want Truth, They Want Submission to Female Supremacy is that the decay of our modern institutions is not an accident of history.
It is the direct, intended result of replacing objective logic, merit, and the trivium with a system of maternal authoritarianism that demands emotional validation above all physical reality.
Riker argues that until men wake up, recognize the subconscious patterns of gossip, shame, and rallying, and outright refuse to participate in the trauma inflation game, the West will continue to collapse into a state of matriarchal infantilism.
And that comprehensive summary leaves us with a deeply provocative thought to mull over, building directly on the implications of Riker's final chapters regarding parallel institutions.
If Riker's analysis of the data is correct, and a massive, growing demographic of highly capable young men is currently opting out and building these parallel, logic-only structures.
Companies operating like Logic Forge and that Denver engineering co-op.
Right, what happens in a decade? Imagine a world where these two completely divergent societal operating systems are finally forced to compete on the global economic stage.
On one side, you have the legacy mainstream institutions, bloated and based entirely on emotional consensus, continuous conflict mediation, and trauma avoidance.
On the other side, you have a lean, parallel economy built strictly on objective output, uncompromising KPIs, and ruthless efficiency.
When those two fundamentally incompatible systems inevitably collide in the free market, which one survives?
That is a fascinating structural question to consider as we watch these trends play out in real time.
All right, that wraps up our deep dive for today. If you found this detailed breakdown of Conrad Riker's theories compelling, or if his structural analysis aligned with your own observations about the shifting logic of the modern world, you absolutely need to buy the ebook to get the full, unvarnished experience of his arguments.
Highly recommend checking it out.
Go to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books and search for it right now. The title, once again, is They Do Not Want Truth, They Want Submission to Female Supremacy.
And don't forget to join the ongoing real-time conversation by following the author on his Substack.
Yes, you can follow him at Conrad Riker. That's conradriker.com. Finally, please take a second to like and subscribe to our show so we can keep bringing you these intense, impartial deep dives into the books shaping our culture. Until next time, keep thinking critically.